haven in the storm. Montana Territory, September 1883. Rain fell in relentless sheets, cold as glacier runoff, pounding the tin roof of the derelict feed store and turning Elk Valley's main road into a quagmire of mud and splintered wagon tracks. Harlan Grady had just tethered his horse under the awning when he spotted her, bareheaded, drenched, clutching a swaddled infant to her chest, staggering along the road's edge like she'd run out of places to turn. He stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the slop. "Ma'am," he called. She spun, eyes wide, breath hitching. Her dress was ragged at the hem, sodden with rain, her hair plastered to her pale face. The baby let out a faint, pitiful whimper, barely cutting through the storm's roar. "I ain't here to harm you," Harlan said, hands up, voice steady. "You look like you need shelter more than I do." Her lips quivered. She glanced at the boarded-up general store, then back at him. "Just need somewhere dry," she murmured. "A place," Harlan said. "Up the ridge. Just me there." Her gaze scanned his face, wary but wary, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. "Harlan Grady," he added. "You and the little one can stay the night." She hesitated, then gave a single nod. He led her to his horse. "You right. I'll walk." She didn't argue, climbing into the saddle with shaking hands, cradling the baby tight. Harlan took the reins and trudged up the narrow trail, rain seeping through his coat, chilling him to the bone. His cabin was modest but sturdy, nestled between ridges and half-shielded by pines. He pushed open the door, lit the oil lamp and guided her inside. The hearth was cold but dry. "Sit there," he said, nodding to a rocker by the fireplace. "I'll get a fire going." She sank into the chair, the baby still pressed to her chest, her movements slow, like she'd forgotten how to trust the ground beneath her. Harlan stacked kindling and struck a match. The fire sparked to life, casting a warm glow. "Name's Willa," she said softly. "Willa Bennett." Harlan glanced up. "That your boy?" She nodded, brushing damp curls from the baby's forehead. "Tobias, 9 months." Harlan hung his coat on a chair and moved to the kitchen corner. "You hungry?" "Yes," she whispered. "If there's enough." "Always enough," he said, pulling down a tin of beans and a loaf of cornbread baked that morning. He handed her a plate and she took it with a quiet "thank you," her eyes tracking him like she expected the moment to vanish. Tobias dozed against her, lulled by the fire's warmth. "You from here?" Harlan asked, sitting at the table. Willa stared into the flames. "Idaho. My husband passed 3 weeks back. Fever took him quick. We were headed to his brother's ranch near Billings, but I never got there." Her voice was flat, worn thin by repetition in her mind. "Tried hiring a wagon in town today. No one would take me. Said the trail was too bad. Then the storm hit." Harlan leaned forward. "You walked in this with a baby." She nodded. "Boarding house man said he don't rent to widows with crying babies." Harlan's jaw tightened, a knot twisting in his chest. "Stay here," he said, after a pause. "Long as you need." Her eyes, glistening, met his. "Why'd you do that? You don't know me." "You looked half broken out there," he said plainly. "No one should be in a storm with a child." She blinked rapidly, looking down at Tobias. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need to," Harlan said. "Just rest." He spread blankets by the fire for her and the baby, then unrolled his bedroll by the door. The storm raged outside, but the cabin held warm and dry. By morning the rain had stopped, and golden light filtered through the pines. Harlan was stoking the fire when Willa stirred, blinking at the brightness. Tobias slept beside her, snug in a quilt. "Smells like coffee," she said, voice hoarse. Harlan handed her a tin cup. "Hope you like it bitter." She gave a faint smile. "Don't recall the last time I had hot coffee." "Still heading to Billings?" he asked. She gripped the cup. "I was, but I got no wagon. No money left." Harlan paused. "Stay here then, till the trail's better, or longer." Cabin's mine, and I don't use half of it. Her eyes searched his. You sure? He nodded. I work long days, don't talk much, but you'd be safe. She studied him, then gave a small nod. All right. The day passed quietly. Tobias began to smile, reaching for Harlan's fingers. Willa washed clothes by the creek while Harlan patched a leak in the roof. They ate dinner at the small table, and as the fire burned low, Willa looked at him across the glow. Thank you, she said, for not asking questions I ain't ready to answer. His gaze held steady. You don't owe me nothing. But her eyes, soft, guarded, curious, hinted at something new, something unplanned. That night, as the wind sighed through the pines, Willa slept beside Tobias without fear, and Harlan sat by the window, watching the stars, wondering if she might be the reason he'd no longer live alone. By the third day, the rain had retreated, leaving the earth soft and fragrant with pine. Harlan returned from checking the fence line, hat low against the sun. Willa knelt by the garden bed behind the cabin, Tobias in a basket shaded by canvas. She wore one of Harlan's shirts, sleeves rolled, boots muddy, coaxing roots from the soil with steady hands. Harlan paused, watching. Got carrots under there? He asked. Not yet, she said, wiping her hands. Mostly stones, but it'll take seed if the nights stay warm. Haven't planted this fall, Harlan said, stepping closer. Didn't think the ground was ready. She leaned on her knees. It ain't, but working it clears my head. He crouched, brushing dirt from Tobias' cheek. He sleeping all right? Better here than anywhere, Willa said. Silence settled, broken only by the wind and Tobias's soft stirrings. Could dig out that patch by the shed tomorrow, Harlan offered. Might get greens before the freeze. She tossed a stone aside. If you don't mind me using the space. Wouldn't offer if I did. Her voice softened. You ever tire of the quiet? Harlan tilted his head. You mean out here? No, the kind that sticks with you, even with someone near. He looked toward the ridge where trees met the sky. Used to think it meant I was broken. Forgot how to talk like others. But it ain't the quiet that gets me. It's pretending I don't need it. Willa's gaze held a quiet warmth. You don't talk like a man too long alone. Maybe I've had too much time to think, he said. She smiled faintly. My husband could fill a room just by stepping in, always talking, even when there was nothing to say. Harlan didn't push, just took the spade and worked the soil beside her. They dug until Tobias fussed. I'll take him in, Willa said, brushing her hands. Harlan offered his hand to help her up. She took it, her rough palm fitting naturally in his for a brief moment before she let go. Something passed between them, quiet and undeniable. That evening, the cabin smelled of beans and sage. Willa stirred the pot while Harlan fixed a porch hinge. Tobias chewed a wooden ring Willa had carved from Harlan's knife. Ever thought of a chicken coop? She asked, not turning. Harlan raised a brow. No reason to? You got one now, she said, glancing at Tobias. I know how to build one. My pa raised hens in Sweetwater. Traded eggs for flour in winter. Harlan wiped his hands. You planning to stay that long? She paused. Don't know what I plan, but I ain't ready to leave. He nodded, unhurried. That night, as the fire dimmed, Willa looked at Harlan across the glow, her eyes carrying a spark of something new. Harlan felt it too. A shift, like the first thaw after a long winter. The wind whispered through the pines, and for the first time, the silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like a promise. A quiet season. The frost came early that year, dusting the pines with white. Harlan was already out before dawn, his axe ringing steady beyond the shed, splitting pine rounds for the winter. Willa opened the cabin door to hang linens, the air sharp against her cheeks. She pulled the blanket tighter around Tobias, who blinked sleepily on her hip, and stepped back inside. Pouring hot water into a basin, she dipped a cloth to clean his face, He squirmed, but her low hee, her mother's old tune, settled him. She didn't hum often anymore. Holland returned, wood shavings clinging to his coat, and dropped kindling by the hearth. "Wrap his feet better," he said, eyeing Tobias's bare toes. "Floor's holding the cold now." Willa nodded. "I was thinking of sewing something heavier. Got any old flannel?" He pointed to a bundle on the lean-to's top shelf, traded last winter, never used. "You trade often?" she asked. "Only when I can't patch or grow it," he said, reaching for the kettle. "Mostly keep to myself." She didn't pry. He didn't explain. That afternoon, with Tobias napping in wool on the cot, Willa cut the flannel by the window, shaping slippers for the baby. Through the glass, she saw Harlan fixing the smokehouse latch, his movements steady, unhurried. She watched him, not sure why. Maybe because he no longer seemed startled by her presence, as if she belonged here. At dusk, he came in, pausing at the sight of the finished slippers. "Made those today?" he asked. She nodded. "Should keep him warm." "Good work," he said. "Better than I could do." Her voice softened. "You ever think about having your own?" The question hung fragile in the air. "Used to," Harlan said, leaning against the table. "Back when I thought I'd marry." Willa waited. "My brother died in the war," he continued. "Left a girl he meant to wed. I helped her after. Fixed her place, kept her fed. Folks talked, said we shamed his name. We weren't anything." Willa's eyes held understanding, not pity. "She left after the first snow. No word, just gone." "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Taught me people don't always need a reason to turn on you." Willa crossed to the hearth, lifting Tobias gently. "I know what that feels like." He didn't ask for more. The fire's soft pop filled the quiet, leaving room for what wasn't said. Later, by the window, she watched moonlight stretch across the ridge. "Saw a doe today," she said. "By the creek, with a fawn still wobbly." She turned to him. "Made me think how some things grow in the cold, if they've got something strong beside them." Harlan stepped closer. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she said. "But I'm not afraid when I wake up anymore." He reached for her hand, slow, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His grip was warm, steady. "I ain't going anywhere," he said. She nodded, eyes bright. Tobias stirred, and she soothed him with a whisper. Harlan's hand stayed in hers, solid as the cabin, the mountain, the life they were quietly building. November brought snow in fits, never heavy, but enough to hush the world. Harlan checked the mare in the barn at dawn, her breath pluming in the chill. The coop behind the shed stood half-built, boards raw, roof undone. He'd promised to finish before the ground froze. Inside, Willa sewed pale muslin at the table, her shoulders squared. "He's cutting another tooth," she said, glancing at Tobias's cradle. "Didn't sleep much." Harlan hung his coat. "I'll ride to town tomorrow. Apothecary might have clove oil." She threaded new cotton. "We'll make do if they don't." She spoke again, quieter. "I had a sister, Louisa. Died birthing her second when I was 12. Harlan dried his hands slowly. "You never said." "I don't say her name much. Mama was never the same, always watching the lane like Louisa might come back." He stood by the table. "You don't owe me a reason for telling me." Her smile was faint. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I hadn't buried so many." He rested a hand on the table's edge. "You keep going." "That's not nothing." Her eyes met his, steady, no walls left. They worked on the coop that afternoon, Willa bracing boards while Harlan nailed, Tobias bundled nearby, chewing his mitten. "Ever think of leaving?" she asked. "No family to go to," he said. "Not anymore." She adjusted her grip. "I've got a cousin in Nebraska, haven't written in years. You thinking of going?" She shook her head. "Used to always think of somewhere else, Now I just think of what needs fixing. He handed her a board. That's how you know you've settled. At dusk, with Tobias fed and the stew bubbling, they sat by the hearth. I saw how you watched him today, Willis said. Harlan leaned forward. You don't look like a man new to children. Mother ran a boarding house, he said. Always babies around. I rocked cradles before I shot a rifle. Her brow lifted. I'd pictured you wild, chasing cattle under stars. Did that too, he said. But I learned swaddling first. She folded her hands. That's not something a man says unless he means it. I don't say much I don't mean. The fire popped, shadows flickering. I want to stay, she said. Past the thaw, maybe longer. The quiet swelled with meaning. I don't want to be a guest. I want to be part of it. Harlan turned to her. Then stay. She crossed to him, her face unreadable but open. The cabin held them, warm and steady, as the frost crept outside. She knelt beside his chair, her hand resting over his. Not out of pity, she said, not because I'm some lost soul needing rescue. His voice was quiet. I don't see you that way. Her gaze held his. I need to know. You're not here because you feel sorry for me, he replied. You're here because I saw a woman with more strength than most men I've met, and I wanted her in my home. She let out a breath, then she leaned forward, her forehead gently touching his shoulder. He didn't pull her closer or urge her near. He let her settle, and after a moment he placed his hand over hers. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, the fire dwindled to embers, and for the first time since the storm, the silence between them felt like belonging. The ground stayed frozen longer each morning, and by mid-December, the creek behind the cabin barely murmured under a thin sheet of ice. Smoke rose straight from the chimney into a sky pale as bone china. Inside, the cabin was warm, the air thick with the scent of pine sap and wool drying by the hearth. Leela stood by the window in the quiet hour before supper, her fingers pressed to the cold glass. Her son, Amos, slept in the sling against her chest, his breath warm through the cloth. Outside, Gideon moved along the fence line, mallet in hand, securing the last of the new posts. The barn roof was mended, the henhouse complete, the root cellar filled. All that could be done before winter's grip was done. She adjusted Amos higher and glanced at the table where her mending lay neglected. She'd meant to patch her scarf, but the needle sat idle, thread trailing across the wood. When Gideon came in, he tugged off his gloves and warmed his hands by the fire, flexing life back into them. He spoke only when she looked up. Found a coyote den by the West Ridge, he said. Tracks suggest a pair, maybe with pups. She shifted the sling, stepping from the window. They'll need to head deeper into the hills before the next snow. He nodded. Come spring, I'm thinking we could string wire along that side, keep the chickens closer. She untied the sling, easing Amos onto his cot. That's sensible. He watched her tuck a blanket around the boy, his expression unreadable. I reckon you've thought about spring, he said. I have. He stepped closer, one hand resting on the back of the rocker. I've been trying to find the words to ask you something. She turned to face him. I know it's been slow between us, he said. Careful. But I've come to rely on you being here. I listen for your voice at dawn. I think of your hands when I work. Her eyes stayed on his. I want you here, he said. I want you here. He's not just through the thaw, not just until the boy's grown. I want you as my wife. The silence stretched, fragile and sharp. I know it's not what you expected, he added. No answer needed tonight, but I had to say it. Leela stepped closer, her voice soft. Do you think I'd still be here if I hadn't already decided? He went still. I've watched you these months, she said. You speak only what needs saying. You build what matters, nothing wasted. And you've never made me feel I owe you for the space I take. Her hand rose to his chest, resting over his heartbeat. "I'd be proud to be your wife, Gideon. Not because I need a home, but because I want this life with you." His hand covered hers, steady and warm. She leaned into him, and he lowered his head until their foreheads met, breath mingling in the cabin's quiet warmth. That night they moved their bedding to the room that had been hers alone. She lit the lamp while he folded Amos's blanket by the cot. They undressed slowly, not from doubt but from care, lying together. No words passed, only the rhythm of breath and the warmth of skin under wool. Leela's head rested on his shoulder, her hand spread over his ribs. He traced the line of her spine, learning each curve. The wind nudged the shutters, but inside the world was steady. They wed under the tall pines in early February, just before the heavy snow. The town's blacksmith and his wife stood witness, bringing a jug of cider and a bolt of green muslin as a gift. Lila wore a dress she had sewn from fabric Gideon had stored months before. Amos, bundled on her back, gazed at the sunlight. That evening, Gideon carved their names into the cabin's doorframe. She stood beside him, her hand light on his arm. By spring, the hen house bustled and Lila's garden sprouted green through the softened earth. Amos took his first steps in the meadow behind the cabin, arms flailing, laughter sharp against the trees. Gideon built him a small cart for hauling sticks, though Amos mostly stuffed it with pebbles and tried to sit inside. Lila hung fresh linens each morning, her hair tied back, her scarf embroidered with tiny yellow blooms. Gideon would return from the fields to find her on the porch, a mug of coffee in each hand, her smile quiet but certain. They rarely spoke of the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined them. The sorrow hadn't faded, but it had eased, woven into the life they'd built. Each night, after Amos slept, they sat by the fire, hands clasped, peace settling like twilight over the hills. When the first snow of the next winter fell, they watched it from the cabin window, hearts steady, hands warm, their love deep and enduring, as rooted as the land beneath them.